You're listening to Dropping Pins, a story-based learning series from the OKS Hunter podcast, hosted by Derek Melkor, and aimed at helping you hone your whitetail hunting skills. You'll hear the aha moments when known and unknown proven whitetail killers started consistently putting mature bucks on the ground.
Hello and good evening. This is Derek from Dropping Pins podcast, part of the OKS Hunter Network. We are sitting down tonight talking some more big buck action with another Wisconsin guy. We're going to be getting a little bit more diverse outside of Wisconsin in the next few days here. I got a couple of guys from outside the area, but me, selfishly, being a Wisconsin hunter, I'm trying to soak up as much information from these Wisconsin big buck killers as I can. So tonight we have a guy who I've looked up to and loved watching what he's been doing in the state of Wisconsin on public land, killing some really, truly giant deer. But more than that, documenting the whole process, puts in tons of time scouting and shed hunting in the spring. And the shed hunting videos, I'm a shed nut, as you guys know. So I love watching the shed hunting videos, especially public land stuff, private land. It's cool just to see some big bone. And along the way, this gentleman that we're about to talk to has amassed some pretty amazing history with some true giant bucks, years and years of trail cams and sheds, and built these storylines with them and gotten to know them. And I think those are the kind of people that we have a lot of information we can learn from on how they got to that spot. And outside of the deer hunting world, I just want to thank this gentleman right away. His name's Tony. He was an active Marine, went through the sniper school, did a couple tours overseas, I believe in Afghanistan. So thank you for your service. And everyone else who served, put their life on the line so that we can do the things we love and chase these silly animals. So tonight we have Tony Van Asten. Really excited to talk to him. So we'll bring Tony on here. Hey, Tony.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
So yeah, I appreciate it. I know you had a long day of work, and the last thing you want to do is probably be pestered by something else, but I appreciate you sitting down with us tonight.
No, I always love talking whitetails, so it's fine by me.
I was really happy to get you on here. If you guys, I'll mention it again at the end, but I mentioned some of Tony's videos in the background here. I got his YouTube channel, which I believe is just Tony Van Asten on YouTube.
I think so, yeah. I think that's what it is.
And obviously, if you're a deer hunter, go check it out. But he's also got some really cool coyote trapping and coyote hunting stuff on there too. So a really good wealth of knowledge. And Tony, I'm going to start off asking just kind of for our listeners here, as before we dive into some stories and some things you picked up along the way, what kind of stuff, terrain, areas did you kind of grow up hunting or that you hunt now? Just so we know a little bit of background about maybe where these styles came from.
Yeah, so I grew up hunting in the North Woods in Wisconsin, just big woods with my old man. And then after I got out of the Marine Corps, I hunted a lease for, I think, 3 years with a few friends. And then the last year I had that lease, I hunted it by myself. That was in like central Wisconsin. I think that was Waupaca County. And then I believe it was like 2018 or 19, I started, I couldn't lease that anymore. The guy sold it, and I started hunting all public land again. Like I grew up a little in the North Woods, but then mostly like the marshes and stuff in kind of central Wisconsin. And now I think this will be like my 4th year of just hunting in the hills, near the Mississippi River. This year I'll be hunting in Iowa since I had my Iowa tag for the first time. So I'm very excited about that. So
that's really cool. Good for you, man.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm hunting a lot of different stuff in the Midwest when it comes to like terrain and habitat. And I love the hills. And I think I'm going to be hunting, and I can see myself hunting in the hills, for a long time, I think. So
Yeah, I noticed in a lot of your videos, the hills seem to have a special allure, and they do with a lot of people just because it's a totally different kind of situation. I just got to ask with your Iowa tag, Iowa does have a bunch of bluff country being right on the other side of Mississippi. I don't know what zone you drew, and I'm not asking, but do you plan on hunting similar terrain as to what you've been, like some bluff country, some hills, or are you going somewhere a little bit flatter?
Yeah, I've checked out I'm going to be hunting in the hills, but there are some places that I've looked at that are a little less hilly compared to like that Mississippi River corridor. There can be some really steep terrain there. A lot of the places that I plan on hunting, like I can see, through my binos, I could probably like see trees that I've hunted on the other side of the river. So,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, so it's
For
not like I'm going like I'm right there. So,
Yeah,
but,
and I mean, that's what's nice is I mean, anyone who knows anything about whitetail, the whole Mississippi River corridor from north to south is an amazing fertile ground for minerals, resource like nutrients that grows big animals. So like it's always good deer hunting, and it's cool that where you've been hunting in that kind of southwestern or western part of the state. I mean, right across the river, Mississippi, Houston, or sorry, Minnesota, Houston County there produce giant bucks. You go a little further south, Iowa's there. I mean, it's a big buck mecca.
yeah, it
It's a great
is.
area.
Yeah. So I'm super excited. I'm gonna go out this weekend, and I just got out and started hanging a few cameras, and I did a ton of scouting out there in the like late winter and spring. Um, but yeah, so I'm gonna just start, just driving around doing some like glassing. The last 45 minutes of light over that Fourth of July weekend was just incredible. There's just, I mean, some of the deer that you see on some of these properties and stuff are just unreal. So
Yeah, so I'm assuming you saw something you liked. I'm
yeah,
sure
I wasn't
October
even.
can't get here quick enough.
Yeah, I wasn't. It wasn't very close to public, but it was so funny too because I pinned this property because I'm like I gotta see like who owns this place, and it was some guy from like New Jersey. He had like 1,600 acres,
Ooh,
and then I drove back through it again right before last light, and there was a giant buck standing out in this field. And I pulled up my Onyx, and I was literally right on the pin that I dropped earlier. I'm like, so yeah, there's
so,
some giants up there.
yeah, probably a doctor or something. He's got his
I
honey
did some
hole.
research on the guy, and yeah,
It's you got to try.
yeah.
Oh,
So
that's cool, man. That's really exciting. We'll have to stay in touch. I'm curious to see how that goes for you. I have a feeling you'll probably stumble into some pretty good deer down there. But
I
kind
hope
of bring
so.
it back to here, what we're doing on our dropping pin show, as you know, is we're trying to do some story based learning where some people who maybe are a little bit less experienced at chasing these big deer and have not yet built history chasing one deer or had experiences with these older age class deer. We're kind of looking for some of those aha moments that you had or stories that things started to click for you, whether that was when you were younger or maybe even more recent because you've kind of switched terrains. But we'd love to open it up here and any story or experience that you had, something you observed that kind of made you think about things a little bit different. Love to hear anything you got, and then we can kind of extrapolate off of that.
uh Well, I think like when things really started what when you like after you kill like your first like mature buck, things a lot of times you start realizing things like in hindsight. Um, and when I had that lease, I had it with a few guys, and we never killed any like good bucks out there those first couple of years, and then I just had it by myself, and I felt like I was just on the cusp of like killing a really good buck out there. One of the guys down the road actually shot like a 230 some inch buck. It was like one of the biggest bucks I ever killed in Wisconsin. So I knew it was
Wow.
like a good area. And I just went totally overboard with the place, and I got permission to do like all sorts of cutting and stuff in there, and all of this stuff was just so unnecessary. But I just knew like what I needed to do to kill. There was a specific buck out there that I had known for 3 years, and the year prior, he had busted off one side. So my buddy actually passed that year, but um, so I like built all these bedding areas throughout this property. It's like a long river bottom, or like creek bottom that went for like a mile and a half, and it was
So
like a
did you assume, like, was the reason you built the bedding areas because like you thought maybe he was spending a lot of time on another property, or was it just kind of like the hinge cutting bedding area thing really took off as like a craze on social media? Was it just like,
yeah.
oh shit, I should just kind of throw everything at him and hope that he sticks?
Yeah, like a lot of it was just like, you know, trying to like do like all the gimmicky things, which I'm not saying like hinge cutting is a gimmicky thing, but I just wanted to do, you know, the first time like I had like the ability to do whatever I wanted on private land, like all the food plots and all that stuff. So I was just nuts about it. And he would spend a little time on other properties. So I wanted to try to keep him there. But really, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have like throughout this entire creek bottom, like at its widest, which is probably like 300 or 400 yards, and then it pinched down into a spot where that was probably like 80 yards wide. And I knew I wanted that's where I wanted to kill him in that pinch. And I wanted to have like bedding areas specific spots, like cut all through that entire creek bottom. And then I basically built routes for those deer to take because there's a ton of like blowdowns and stuff. So it's hard for them to even go through there. So I basically built like routes and I planned everything, the entire property around one tree. And I needed like a strong northwest wind. That was the first time I was ever gonna sit that tree. I had never hunted it before, and I knew I wanted it anytime after like October 12th. The first strong northwest wind, like a cold front, I was gonna sit that tree and I was gonna hunt it all day. And we got that on October 20th. But basically, that downwind side of all those bedding areas, like on a northwest wind, I built it where I basically had it's all egg fields along that creek bottom, and then so I had a screen like built all the way around that entire edge of that farm field, all those fields, so I could get all the way to the backside of that property and kind of like come in from behind him. And I knew like he would be checking all those bedding areas on a northwest wind, and I made it so like there was no possible way that he could cut my ground scent, and he could never win me. And it was way
Sounds like
over,
you put some
so
thought into it
overboard.
for sure.
Um, and then I actually had like planned it out where my feet were never gonna like actually hit the ground. Like there was like logs that I could like, so I wasn't like crunching through leaves or anything, where I could literally go log to log and up the tree. And it was just crazy because it was so cold that October 20th, I sat there like 11 hours. And what I didn't account for was, so I had one of these like cut bedding areas that was probably like 80 yards away from me. So there's like this big pocket in the timber. And then once it started to get close to dark and the wind started to die down, like the wind would hit that like tree line and it would kind of like swirl in there. And a few does came through like right on the trail that I had cut for them, and they winded me. Um, and I didn't know like how they winded me. And then I realized after the fact what was happening. But right right at last light, I was so freaking cold. I could hear them grunting through the timber like a long ways, and I just knew like right away he was gonna, you know, come right down that trail that those does did. So I knew like where he was gonna bust me at. So I was already at full draw, and he just locked up right underneath me at like whatever 8 yards.
Oh,
And so that he was basically like facing me. So I knew I had to shoot them right there. And I had almost the exact same thing happen to me in the summertime when I was like glassing one of those fields. I had all my trail cameras and my backpack under my tree, and I was gonna glass a field, and he stood like over top of those trail cameras for like 10 minutes, and he had
Right
no idea.
underneath you?
He was freaking out. Yeah, I had my camera with me, so I felt like he was like in the exact same like panic mode, and I shot him right in the throat patch, and it actually went like in all the way through him, and it hit the arrow came out and hit his right above his back hoof. So
Wow.
so he went like 80 yards and tipped over, which I didn't know at the time. We went out the next morning and he was laying there stone dead. So, but that was, I mean, I just have so many pictures of that deer, and I put every single picture that I had of that buck from the past few years into a folder, and I just broke down like every single like what was he actually doing. And I mean, basically I feel like there's so many like you hear all these words like all these like buck bedding areas. Basically, like everyone wants everything to be black and white. Like they want an exact formula on how to kill like a big buck, and that's like what I designed that property to be like as clear cut as possible. And I'm still kind of like hunting like the same way, but it's not necessary to do all that what I did to that property, but
But it did work. I mean, in the
mhm.
long run, you put that deer down, and he kind of followed the plan that you had laid out for him, which is pretty wild that it actually did happen like that. That's incredible.
And I was so excited for like what that property was going to turn into, because I spent so much. I established all these warm season grasses out there and stuff, and there was a giant 3-year-old that also lived on that property that was out there since he was a fawn, and he had like it's kind of like a flyer pointer. It's almost like a drop tine, and I thought that deer was going to turn into something like you know, huge the next year. Well, right after I killed that buck that night, I lowered my bow down. I was like hanging from my rope, and that buck came down the exact same trail as those does and that other buck, and he walked right past my bow, like swinging right in front of his face. Couldn't believe it. And he ended up getting killed by a gun hunter like a mile away. So, and then that was the last year I had that place. So.
Yeah, you'd made a lot of improvements, and then they probably made a pretty penny selling it as a
Yeah,
turnkey big buck killing property.
I would love to walk it. It's been a long time since I've been there, but I'm sure I'd like to see what
I
that all looks like.
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this just because you got rid of, that property, you kind of lost access to it. And you said you really only hunted the stand the one time when you killed,
Mhm.
but just having created those multiple bedding areas, were you using those warm season grasses like in and around those bedding areas?
Um, I used them like on the back so there was like a lot of different like food plots and like cutouts in that creek bottom, and I used them like on the back side of that. It's like a buffer, kind of like like a buffer zone in between that food and um I don't know. I just wanted that grass to be tall where they couldn't be in the timber and look out into
And
a
see ya.
food plot and see, or I didn't want them to. I wanted them to go into that food plot if they couldn't smell it to see if there was does out in that food plot. So that was kind of the theory behind it.
Gotcha. Um, I don't know where you ran cameras. I don't know if you ran any cameras around those other bedding areas, but I was just curious. Before October 20th, when you killed that buck, did you at all notice, or even like after you shot him and you maybe walked around, did you notice that he kind of transitioned between multiple of your created ones? Do you think he had one that he liked? Was he using the ones that you made and cut out? Do you know anything
I
about
don't
like
think
what?
no, I don't think he was using them. He definitely his sign was like clear as day. He had a whole bunch of like kickers around his bases, and he had like a big point off his main beam that he busted off a couple days before I shot him. But so his rubs stuck out like a sore thumb. But
Just thrashed
um,
and shaggy.
yeah, yeah. So the trees were just mangled. But he, like, I thought I knew what that deer was doing, and then I didn't realize until a while after when he would be on that property, there's like a farm. The neighbors had like 2 acres or something that like kind of like cut right into the property, and he was bedding like right behind their barn pretty much, and it was pretty much the only place, you know, that I never went, none of us went when it was the four of us hunting it, and it would have been almost impossible to hunt in there. But I mean, and now I look for places like that where people, aren't going ever. And I just feel like so second nature. Like, I can't believe I wouldn't have known that. Now I feel like I would have known that right away. But,
That is one of the common themes that's the cool thing. I haven't talked to a ton of people yet for this segment, but one of the things, I got a buddy who's coming on tomorrow night, and I begged him to tell this one story, which was he was hunting on his. Well, I don't want to give too much away because he's going to come on and tell it, but he basically asked the landowner, okay. The landowner was like, "Oh, I think this buck is going here or here or here." He said, "Okay, thank you. Where do you never go? Like, where does no one ever go?" And he went in there and killed that buck that night. Like, it's those spots that they know they're not being harassed, right? Like, so
yeah,
I think you played it perfectly because you waited till the end of October when the bucks were starting to check those doe bedding areas, which is what you essentially created, was a whole bunch of doe bedding, right? And then you just
right.
waited for him to travel downwind of them, checking them through the highest odd spot in a beautiful little pinch. And hey, you got your
Yeah,
buck. That's awesome.
yeah. And I just wanted it where I could, at least get a couple sits out of it. Like, I didn't want it to be a one and done. And that's the thing, like, that's the beauty of public, is you can have tons of those spots that you can have this, you might have one that's a lot better than another, but I feel like I couldn't even burn up all those sits throughout a year if I tried. Just over the years, you just accumulate so many just killer spots that you don't know for sure if no one's messed it up, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like so confident, like just like that hunt every single time I go usually. So,
Yeah,
and you're
that's
so limited. I mean, you can manipulate private land, that's a whole nother animal, but you just have so many options hunting public. So,
I've got a personal question for you, just because the area of northeastern Wisconsin, and even around here, like the hill country stuff, I've watched, I've read, about it, but I just haven't spent much time doing that just because I haven't had a ton of opportunity to do it, but it does intrigue me. So I was wondering if you had any stories, instances where, going from hunting the stuff that you were, creek bottoms, big woods, and then all of a sudden going up into some, I mean, the areas you're hunting are freaking steep. I saw a couple of your pictures. There's freaking some big ass hills. It's steep.
mhm.
That, like, learning process of all of a sudden relating what you knew to how deer are using that more dramatic terrain. Do you have any kind of like story where things started making sense, how bucks were using it, or like, how to get in and hunt them? Because I think it's a little bit, I don't want to say black and white, but there's a lot of information out there on how bucks bed in hill country and whatnot. But like getting in and hunting those spots effectively seems to be the by far the biggest challenge. Do you have
Yeah.
any kind of like story relating to hill country that could potentially help anybody listening, or myself selfishly? what
Well,
what
I have
what can I
a
help do
lot of,
you?
I have a lot of stories, but yeah, it was a huge learning curve, totally different. So I think it's, like in central Wisconsin where it's flatter and like marshy stuff. I feel like it is harder to like put your finger on where a buck is actually going to be, because you might have an idea where he's at, and he might bed in, several different bedding areas. And then which route is that buck gonna take to wherever he's going at whichever time of the year. Um, it's easy to play the wind in that type of stuff. Like, you know what the wind is going to do, and you can, split hairs with the wind. You never have to, you can have your just off wind where um, that buck's not going to wind you, and you can make that happen. And that is not the case in hill country. But it is very easy to, or I think it's a lot easier to, like, where's this buck going to be at? And I could say, like, 2 or 3 spots and be pretty close, like almost every time. And then how is that buck going to travel? That's not, all that difficult. But what's difficult is just getting to him without, especially if it's, all the leaves are off, it's super loud, it's open. And to beat the thermals is so difficult. Uh, so one thing that a lot of people like to be, like, up in a tree, early. If it's an evening hunt, they want to be up in the tree early, and I'm totally okay with just sitting for like that last. If I have like a route where I can like go up a ditch and um, basically like the sun is almost like crested, and all the thermals are settling down, I think that's like the best scenario really to kill one of these bucks in the hills, because um, I don't really know where I was going with this story, but I just think I'm trying to think of a specific.
Well, no, I mean that totally makes sense. As like as one of the top tactics you can do is you don't want your scent going up in those thermals. If the sunlight's still beating down, you get in there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The more time your scent is going up and then doing variable things wherever close to where that deer is bedded. Obviously, your odds of getting busted just go through the roof. But like you're saying, if you're waiting until that shade starts hitting that hill and you take a ditch up, so like ideally, I'm assuming you're
Yeah,
going to climb that ditch that your scent is going to drop straight back down by the
yeah,
time you get up there and get your stand set up, so that deer just has as
yeah,
little opportunity as possible to smell you.
yeah. I mean, I'll pay attention to like the wind speed, and as long as I still have the day winds to cover up a little bit of noise, like I will go in at like as late as possible a lot of times. Um, and there's like so many scenarios where I found, like, I know I have a really good idea of where a buck's going to be at, and if you want to try to like if you want to try to hunt that deer in the morning, it's so difficult because, yeah, your thermals are going to be rising, but not until like 9 o'clock in the morning. So, oftentimes, even if like the food is up on top, he's almost always going to drop down below where he's going to bed. And like if he's bedding on a point or just like on a side hill or up at the head of a ditch, he's usually going to be below where he's going to bed, and he'll circle around that. So if you're up in a tree, um, your scent's just going to be dropping right on top of his head. And then, yeah, you're going to be fine once the sun starts hitting that side of that hill and the thermals are, gone. He's not going to smell you. Um, but it's so hard to, make everything work in the hills. I think like the ideal scenario to kill a really good buck in the hills is, and I feel like their biggest or their weakest point is during the rut when it's somewhat calm and they want to be cruising like in really steep country. They can't smell those does unless they're right up on the top. Um, so, but if you're up on the top, like, and a lot of those does are bedding, on like on the flat tops, in that
Right
steep.
before it drops down, is that what you're
Well,
noticing?
sometimes like there a lot of the hills like in western Wisconsin and like in Iowa and stuff, they're super steep, and then it's just like they're perfectly flat, like 60-yard wide, ridge tops, and a lot of those does are just bedded right on the very top. So for those bucks to be able to smell those does, they have to be on the top. And um, basically like you're totally bullet. If once you're up there and that, you're and that sun's hitting the top of that ridge, you're totally bulletproof until, right at last light. Once, you can have doe, it doesn't matter what the wind is doing at all. Um, and a lot of those bucks like on trail camera and stuff, you see them cruising like right in the middle of the day because it's their best opportunity to, find those does. Um, so being up there, I feel like is definitely like a huge weak spot for those bucks. They're very vulnerable at that time, but you'll see like at last light, you can have. I hunted out there a couple of years ago, and I just had does everywhere, bedded all around me all day. I couldn't eat, take a drink of water. It was terrible.
That's
But
the
then
worst.
right
Like,
at last
everyone's like,
light,
"Oh, you saw a deer?" You're like, "No, I don't. I go bed 100 yards away. Get out of here."
yeah, and I didn't go up there until it was like the sun was like just coming up, and I got to the top, and I wanted to be able to like see where I wanted to hang my stand, anyways. But so I'm like, I climb up a tree, and I'm putting my stand up against the tree, and I'm standing on my climbing sticks, and I hear something coming, and I think it was a 3-year-old, but just a stud of a buck, and he like literally walked. I just was standing there with he just walked, I don't know, probably 15 yards from me. I'm like, well, that kind of sucks, and I don't know if I would have shot him anyways, but
Maybe that was helpful.
yeah. But once
Didn't.
the thermals like start settling in the evening, all of a sudden it's like all of them. Well, they just know something's wrong. They're like, they feel so comfortable. They've been there all day, but now all of a sudden they can smell someone. Like they don't know what's going on, and that's like a learning process for those deer. Um, that's why like those mature bucks every year they get better at learning actually like what the wind is doing, and it takes them time to find those locations. But you'll see, like in some spots the wind does just ridiculous, just crazy stuff, and like a younger buck he'll bust you. And I remember I was sitting up at like the head of this ditch, and there's a little bit of water in it, and I expected the wind to do something different there, but I was dropping milkweed, and it was like it would suck right down to that water, like every single time. So I knew that's where if a big deer came through there, I had to shoot him at that water. And a little like 2-year-old 8-pointer came through there, and I'm like, any second now he's gonna snap his head. And like sure enough, he cracked me, but he had no idea where I was at. And then he like circled around me, and he was looking like in the total opposite direction because um, I just don't think they understand exactly where that person is. But
They
older
smell
deer,
that
yeah.
and they're alerted, but I mean, the wind is always doing some strange things with currents and so far that's like two stories that you brought up that I think for like a listener, if you're not using some sort of wind indication, like milkweed is obviously a great example of that. Everyone uses that. You get those little bottles, but like I know a lot of people are like, don't mess with that. Like the wind's going to do what it's going to do. But knowing where you need to take a shot, like whether you want to learn about the wind or not, knowing exactly where your scent trail is going so you don't let that buck walk into it going, oh, I hope he takes 4 more steps. When if you would have shot him 4 steps ago, he would have had no clue
Yeah.
you were there. Now that buck's on high alert and he's gone. Like that's
Mhm.
just one little fun takeaway from I heard you say it 2 times already. Like you knew where that deer needed to be shot before it got there. I just had to point
Mhm.
out a little
I think
side
that's
note for anybody who's
one of the most important things is like a buddy of mine was telling me a story last year where he shot a really good buck, and he's like, yeah, I really wanted the shot when he was going to be broadside, but he had to cross this ditch, and then he knew something was wrong, and I don't know how the wind was going that opposite direction. I'm like, well, your thermals were just settling into the ditch. Like you have to be checking that and know where, when he's going to get you, because a lot of times you're splitting hairs with like big deer, and um, especially when it comes to ground scent too. That's like, if you have a spot picked out, like you have to look at everything from a distance, and if you have to cross a deer trail, like I will always cross a trail, um, in a spot that I can shoot. And I made that mistake many times before, but and I like to give myself a little leeway too, like during the rut, like I want to have, as much room on each side of that trail, because if a doe stops there and that buck's 30 yards behind her and you can't shoot that buck, then you're really in a bind. So you have to pick and choose the spots that you're gonna cross trails and where they're gonna pick up your ground scent. So
I think that's something that, like, even as like a younger hunter, I used to mess up all the time because my brain just didn't work that way yet. So it was like, you knew you didn't want to leave too much ground scent around your stand. So I would like go out of my way to like cross the deer trail a little bit further away. Oh, I don't want to leave any right by my stand. But then the exact scenario that you just said would happen, right? Like the deer would be like 50 yards away, and you're like, oh shit, I guess he's not coming because that's where I crossed the stupid trail. And then as you
a lot of
like
times too, like the deer cut your ground scent 100 yards away, and they're like, oh, I didn't, you have no idea that deer probably just hit your ground scent and turned around, and you just thought you're in a terrible spot or something, but you blew it a long time ago, and it's like the type of stuff that you're actually walking through. Like I don't want to walk through, like cross a trail in like deep grass or something where I'm rough, if I can cross it in something in water or like in just like dry oak leaves or whatever.
On a log, like you mentioned before, that's all better
or
than
I'll actually like hop over them or just jump over them and, but yeah, that's the
just
thing.
used a dead stick and pole vaulted over a trail. I'm not joking. It was like a 6-foot stick, and I was like, hey, if it gives me 4 feet on each side, let's go.
Yeah, whatever it takes. Another story that I was gonna mention that I thought was a pretty cool story, and it usually never works out, how you dream it up in your head. But the first year after I had that lease and I got back into hunting public land, I was scouting all sorts of different properties, and I was scouting in the summer, and there was actually like a tornado that touched down in the marsh, or not in the marsh, but in Wisconsin that day. But earlier in the day, I had jumped a buck that was like bedded 40 yards or 50 yards from this parking lot, and it was a really big deer. I couldn't really tell how big he was, but it was later in the year, it was like October 27th, and I planned on hunting somewhere else that evening. And like every place I wanted to hunt, there was a guy there. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go back to that parking lot buck and just give him a shot. I had a place, like I thought this all up on like where, if that buck was bedded there, on how I could kill him on a westerly wind. And we had it was very calm, but it was like 5 miles an hour out of the west. And so I parked there,
So is this the same day you jumped him?
No, well, I jumped him in the
Okay.
summer. I jumped him in the summer. And I did run cameras in there, and I thought he was still bedding there a lot, like by that parking lot. So I had like reason to believe that he was still, it's like a perfect spot for him. Like there's a little pond right there. And it's like a gravel road, and then there's a gravel parking lot, and he would let people walk by him, and it gets hunted a lot there, or people park there a lot. So I parked in that parking lot, assuming that buck was right there, and I walked past him like out into the marsh, and I just kept on walking, and then I circled all the way back, basically almost back to that parking lot.
So you hit him with like a decoy route, like you wanted to make it sound like your normal guy, and then he's going.
And I know he could hear me going the entire way out into the marsh, and then I circled all the way back, and then there's this little like strip of moss. It's like it was built for this scenario, like
nice and quiet.
It was so quiet, and then I got to my tree, so I was probably like 250 yards from him now, and it's like 2 sticks high. So I got settled in there, and it was just then it was like dead calm, and I knew like on a westerly wind he could like this marsh has like all these like strips of trees and like tall grass. They're like man-made years ago, and so he could walk down like one of those strips, and like the wind would be hitting him in the side of the face on a westerly wind until like he hits basically like this edge of this timber, and then he takes a 90, and then he walks straight into the wind out into the egg fields. And so I knew like he would feel totally bulletproof, and I was like right at that elbow in that 90 basically, where he's gonna turn right there, and he thinks he can smell everything, and he wanted to smell where I was, um, because he thought I had walked beyond him.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always ducks in that little pond, and I'm like sitting in that tree, and I'm like, man, I would if I hear some ducks fly up, I know he's coming my way, because I could hear him quacking over there. Well, then I hear, sure enough, like right after I thought that, these ducks fly out of the pond, and I can just hear them walking like right to me, and I'm like, there's no way, this is crazy that this is actually going to work out.
So was it like it was standing water? Was he like sloshing? You could hear him?
Little bits of, yeah, some pockets of, it was a wet year too, but there's pockets of water and stuff. I could hear him, and it just sounded like he should be like right in front of me, because like it just sounded like he was so close. And then I finally see him, and I come to full draw. This is the first time this has ever happened to me. But I came to full draw, and my arrow just fell off my string,
Oh
and it
no.
literally ticked like every branch on the way down. So yeah, it was terrible. So I'm at full draw with no arrow, and he's just locked on me, and I'm like, well, the gig's up now. And like right at that moment, there was a buck that was bedded like probably 50 yards away from me the entire time. I had no idea he was there. So he stood up because he heard this other buck coming, and then they stared at each other, and it like gave me an opportunity to grab an arrow.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and then I came to full draw again, and then he locked back on me, and I released an arrow, and he dropped so hard, and I spined him. But I just after
Wow.
that, I was like, I cannot believe like that entire scenario that I had drew up just worked out to a T, because it doesn't ever happen like that. But
Oh my
I thought
gosh.
that
And
was a
that
really
the
cool story, though.
I mean, and you said you were like 250 yards away from where that buck you think he was bedded.
Yeah, probably something like that. Yeah.
So like there's a testament to anybody who's like newer or getting into like mobile hunting, like hang your set as quiet as you can every time, because
Mhm.
that deer that was close to you, like 250 yards, you could have probably got away with a little noise in your mind and like,
Mhm.
he's across the pond, there's ducks. But like if you hadn't hung that stand quiet, number one, that other buck, if he had heard you, could have ran right back into that area where the
Mhm.
big one was, messed the whole thing up, or bounded off in any direction. And then the arrow thing, I mean, you never know if that would have happened or not. But he made
Yeah.
a great decoy to get you a little time for that second arrow to hit your knock.
Mhm. And that's one thing that made a huge difference for me was, um, I started to, so when I was hunting the marsh, I would force myself to like, even if I was like running late for a hunt or whatever, like once I got to a certain spot, it was usually like 100 to 150 yards out, I would stop, and I would take like a 15-minute break, and I would just like cool down. I would sit like in a shadow somewhere, do like some glassing, just like cool down. And then that last like approach to where I wanted to hunt was as quiet as and slow and methodical as possible. And I cannot tell you like the difference of deer sightings in general. Just that year was crazy, and the amount of deer that I would see, they hear something. I mean, they're hearing stuff like all day, and a lot of times I think we give them more credit than they deserve when it comes to what they can hear. Like especially like in tall grass and stuff, they can't hear as well as you think. So they hear something, and then they just give it time, and then they're like, okay, well, whatever that was just is gone now. And then they get up and then they go investigate. And I've had so many deer like walk right in my lap when I'm sitting there, like fawns, does, and small bucks and stuff. But that made a huge difference. Is just taking that, you can be as loud as you want or whatever on your walk in, and then a lot of times you're tired, you just want to get to that tree and you can see it, and then you rush it at the end, and
I
that's when you should be doing the exact opposite. So
I love that idea. The idea of stopping 10 or 15 minutes and like you said, just sitting down, find a shady spot and glassing. Cause like I get the same way where like, you know, I love the scouting. I love the thought process behind the spots that I hunt. So I get so excited to be in the spot that like I get rushed. Like I want to get in the tree. Like I want to get in. But
yeah.
like if I did that, and I'm gonna do it this season where I'm gonna stop, make myself sit down for like 10 minutes, because I feel like that is enough to just like kind of reset your mentality and like what you're doing from just like
Mhm.
mad rushing to like, okay, slow the hell down, think about what you're doing, place your feet in the quiet spots. I'm definitely going to use that this season because I have been guilty of. I just I can't wait to get in the tree. Just go go go, get in the tree, and then okay, now be quiet. But man,
Yeah, and think about how many times like you've been hunting and you hear like something that really sounds like a deer, like a stick break or whatever, and then you hear it a few more times, and then all of a sudden it's like 15 or 20 minutes, you don't hear anything, and you just totally, you stop paying attention to it. Then you're looking like elsewhere, and all of a sudden, boom, there's like a big buck just standing, like he just, that it's the same with deer. Like they'll pay attention for a while, and then eventually they write it off as, well, I don't hear, it's not there anymore. So I think that, that little pause there is big.
yeah. Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on and saying that and rubbing salt in my wound. That's exactly what I did last season on like October 16th. I went in the morning hunt in a marsh, and just based off previous trail camera pictures, I had bucks moving through this little pocket, through a little finger of buckthorn to another pocket in the morning, usually in daylight. And I thought what was happening is I thought they were bedding in this one little pocket, which is closer to like where there's some human activity. And I thought they were bedding there in the morning because like the hill where everybody comes in from kind of drops down in this first pocket. And I was like, oh, they can probably smell, the thermals. And
Mhm.
then mid-morning, 8, 9 o'clock, I was getting them on camera moving to the deeper one. So I thought they were repositioning their bedding.
Mhm.
So I snuck in here. It's all shit trees. I get in this little tiny popple on the backside of this cluster, and the historic rub line is off to my right. And I'm like a left-handed archer. So I'm
Mhm.
set up perfect. And I hear, a couple little things coming in, and it stops behind this cluster of popples. And I turned in my saddle to my weak side and I clipped my release on. I was like, this is it. He's just coming in on this other trail. And I stood there for 25 minutes and heard nothing. And
Oh
then I
yeah.
did that. And, I did that. I was just like, you know, maybe it bedded down, maybe it just walked away. Put my bow on the other side of the tree, hung it up, turn and look. The freaking giant ass buck, the number one on my trail camera, is at 8 yards, coming
Uh-huh.
right. He's gonna come right underneath me. So I'm
Oh
trying to
yeah.
grab my bow, and I bump my arrow on a freaking branch because I'm trying to watch him as he's coming right underneath me. And like stupid ass me, what do big deer do when they're like getting ready to bed down, or like they just stand. Like big deer are notoriously for
Yeah.
just standing and observing for 15 minutes and just making sure everything's. I should have freaking been thinking of that, but no, I was impatient.
It's crazy how they can. Someone mentioned it once. Like the most impressive thing about a whitetail is that they can stand. You know, Try it once. Stand still and just like stare. It's almost impossible. Like they
They're
will
good
do it
at it. The big ones, the
forever.
big
Yeah.
ones are especially good at it.
I like that story that you just talked about though. Like where like they were shifting their, you didn't know if they're like shifting their bedding or whatever, and that was like a huge aha moment for me. Is like I went to the marsh in the summer a few years ago, and I was looking for one specific deer. It was like in July, and because I just wanted to see if he made it through the year or not. I knew like there's like this giant white pine that this guy had cleared out like years ago for gun hunting, it looked like. And I knew I could sit up in that tree, and in the morning I could see basically every single deer going to bed. through the CRP field. It was like all foggy that morning, and the first deer I saw, I could only see like 75 yards until like the sun kind of came up. Was that buck? He's dead now, but he was a giant, and I expect him to go to one of these like bedding areas, and he basically through the CRP. There's like this little low spot, like a little ditch that's like 2 feet wide, and it's like a running creek, and then there's like these pipes that are out there that like boil water out of like these old galvanized pipes in the marsh. I don't know like when they did that, but well, this white pine is like basically like right over top of that little one of those little pipes, and he bedded right underneath me, and so cool to see it. Like I was looking at him through my binos, and I'm like, why is he bedding like right? This is so weird. And then the whole like CRP field was full of deer, like does and like one good 3-year-old buck and a bunch of younger bucks, and they all kind of went to the bedding areas, and he stayed there, and like all the bucks almost like walked up to him, and it was almost like they were like, what are you, what, come on, let's go, kind of. And it was
So
like
they
that.
all left?
Yeah, they all went to go bed, and I'm like, I can't believe that he's bedding right here. And it was dead calm, and like throughout the night the wind was like out of the west and then like a little out of the east. And I realized like they do this in the hills a lot too, is I call it like a tweener spot, like in between spots. So they have like a spot in between like their main like bedding areas, that where the air is like settling down in the morning, like in that low spot by that little bit of water. And he just needed that wind to like make up his mind until he could, because like a lot of those deer will reposition, or they'll just be in a spot that's, they're at a huge disadvantage and they're fine with it. It's, the wind switched or whatever. But this buck, he needed to know what the wind was going to be. And like once there was like just a stitch of wind out of the west, he got up, and then he hit like a bunch of scrapes in July, and then went to his bedding area. And it like
Wow.
clicked for me like later, like what he was doing. And then I started to see that more often, like, and in the hills they do that all the time. Like there'll be like an 80-yard shift, especially with the big mature bucks, and that's like another spot or another like circumstance that they're a little vulnerable, like at that time. Like they're bedded like on a hill, but they're lower in the more like right at first light, because everything is still settling down, and a lot of times they don't want to be up at like that top third until the thermals are rising.
So
So
it's
like,
almost like they're taking
yeah,
what they can get and just hitting that falling through until that little bit of day wind kind of indicates, hey, go up that ridge or go up
yeah,
that
then
ridge.
they're bedded. Like if they go up to that top third, like in the dark, they can only smell what's above them, that that little bit, and they can't smell anything below them. So they're a lot of times they'll bed a little bit lower, and then they'll have like an 80-yard shift. You'll see it at like 8:30 in the morning. A lot of like big bucks will get up and they'll just move a little bit, and then they'll rebed. and and that's why they like those spots like too, where there's like all different like points and ditches, and like those gnarly like hubs and stuff, where they can, if the wind does switch, they can just, they're not going to be in a spot that they can't smell anything. They can just like move around the point. um
That
that's why
man,
like if you
that's
get like an east to west like wind switch, that's so rare. You'll get like
yeah.
north to south switches, but that can be deadly, because you can either, if it switches like midday and they're bedded up, like you can get to a spot without them knowing in that circumstance, or you can plan for them, adjusting. And like a lot of times they might have to, go all the way down the ridge and rebed, and then they're screwed. They're walking down that ridge. A lot of times I think they just will stay there. Um, but that's a really good scenario to kill a
Man,
good one.
that that was a good. I really like that in between idea. And just for anybody who's listening, who maybe a little bit earlier on in your hunting career, you may not have as much experience. Like you got to remember, like Tony is putting in a lot of hours scouting these properties. So like knowing where to go on a wind shift, like when it goes from this way, like he's got it kind of figured out a little bit. Like he's walked all of it. So like if you don't have that time to put in to get in scout and know these different points, like you can take what he's saying and make your best damn guess and have an aha moment of yourself. Like just go apply what something you've heard and go give it a shot. Even if you don't necessarily know where they would shift to, like there's going to be your own learning experience right there. But like, man, that's a cool idea. It totally made me think when you said that in between spot. It made me think of that exact spot in the story that I just mentioned where that buck bedded, because with that little pocket that's right on the edge of like where that hill comes down, basically another 80 yards behind that, deeper into like the buckthorn, is another wet pocket. And the deer seem to, they either like go off to the west side to bed, or they kind of work around the east side to bed. And it makes me think that those bucks are using that as an in-betweener, like a morning, sit right there, and then they make their decision and they take it one way, they take it the other way. Because I get bucks in the morning. I have cameras not set up for that because I hadn't really thought about that. But I do have cameras on each side, and I get bucks going in the morning sometimes, in the mornings sometimes this way. I think exactly what you said was my aha moment right there. Now I got a better idea of maybe how they're using that.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Like I had noticed it, more often that they do that, but I never really thought of that before until I actually saw them do that. So it was pretty cool watching them, just be bedded underneath me for a long time, and that was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Coming up here on an hour, Tony, did you have anything else you wanted to share? Otherwise, we're good to wrap it up whenever you think, man.
No, I mean I could talk deer forever, so I better get cut off here.
Well, yeah, and that's just all the more reason to have you on again, especially after you get some a little bit more boots on the ground in Iowa. I'm curious to see how that goes for you. So, if you're open to it, I'd love to have you back on, or even on the OKS Hunter podcast at some time if you ever want to come on and chat here. But I really enjoyed just discussing.
I would love that. Hopefully, I have a little more sleep in me, and I'm not so. My brain is just fried right now, so I can barely even think.
Yeah, no, hey, I appreciate you taking the time and coming on and telling some stories. And for anybody listening, you can learn a lot just by watching some of the videos that Tony's put up. And just a multi-talented guy between the deer hunting, the trapping. You did some cool antler restoration videos. That's something I do a ton of. I do a ton of antler repair for people, so I got a kick out of that video.
Kind of trying to make a video right now, and then I'm like, maybe I shouldn't. One of that beast buck. I found two of his old antlers this year, and I really want to make a video on that, but I don't know if I'm going to or not. I don't know. I've been like rebuilding this antler. Like I'll do like a little bit, here or there, and it's been sitting there forever. So,
man, people don't really realize it, but there's a reason that taxidermists don't like rebuilding tines, because it is time consuming to do it well. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it's cool when you see a guy that does it like well. It's like, wow, that is amazing. I can't even tell the difference. But
yeah, cool, man. Well, hey, thanks a lot for hanging out. Go check out Tony's YouTube channel. There's some great shed hunting action on there. Some huge bucks. His beast buck is incredible. Go watch that hunt right now. You won't be disappointed. Tony, thanks a lot for hanging out. Best of luck this season. Let's stay in touch. I want to hear how things go. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right.